Hi, I'm Elizabeth Otters White.
And I'm Victoria Fontana, and welcome to the Inner Academic.
Yes, welcome. As coaches who work with a wide range of academic clients and as past higher ed people ourselves, Victoria and I are keenly aware of the challenges academics face every day.
For sure. And we wanted to get honest and open about those. And so Elizabeth and I created the Inner Academic.
Right. Because we've learned from our own experience and from our work with clients that given all the external pressures, thriving in academia starts from the inside out.
Absolutely. And in each episode, we're going to explore a question or a struggle that comes up often with our clients, and not to offer a one size fits all solution, but to really help you feel less alone, broaden your perspective, and discover new possibilities moving forward.
Today, we're starting with one of the things we most commonly hear some version of from academics. I'm spread so thin that I'm not doing anything to the best of my ability.
Yeah. And for you, that might sound like I have too much on my plate, or I'm constantly putting out fires, or simply I'm overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm. Together, we explore why this feeling's so common and what's often happening beneath the surface, from energy management to self talk, boundaries, fear, impossible standards. We cover a lot of ground.
Yeah, we definitely do. And we share some practical coaching questions that can help create a little more space and maybe a little less overwhelm.
So, wherever you are in this moment, we're glad you're here.
Let's dive in.
We decided to start with a topic that we kind of capture with a phrase that we often hear from people, at least some version of this, and that is, I'm spread so thin that I'm not doing anything to the best of my ability. People don't
Mm.
usually say it in quite those words, but it's something very much like that. I don't know, Victoria, does that like resonate with you and what you see
Yeah.
and hear from
Yeah, I hear people say like I have too much on my plate, or I'm always putting out fires, or I'm overwhelmed, basically, is I
Right,
think the
right,
main
right.
message, right? Yeah.
Right, right. And I think it's so interesting because there are kind of, we talked about this a little bit. There's sort of like two components almost to this message. There's like the I'm overwhelmed, I have too much, I'm spread too thin. And then one result of that that was captured in the phrase that we gave is I'm not doing anything the way I want to do it. And
Mm.
there's like a whole other, I think, set of things that come along with that. And it also can become this like, almost self-perpetuating, right? Because you don't feel good about what you're doing, then you might have all kinds of tendencies to do all kinds of really unhelpful things actually to get rid of that feeling, whether it's overworking or just feeling really deflated and sort of underworking. But it can become like this cycle that can be really tough on people, I think, and kind of hard to get out of.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, you're hitting on something important, like when you said underworking, the word paralysis came to mind, like where we just get completely frozen and
Right,
can't move forward. So
right,
yeah.
right, right. And it's just to share sort of even myself, like I was running a little bit behind for this conversation. And so I'm like kind of darting around and I'm trying to find stuff to stick on this little thing behind me. And I can't find the stuff because my house was just under construction and all this stuff. And again, that's almost like because my tendency is the over functioning. And so if I can
Mm.
just find what I want, if I can just get it set up the way I want, right? And that then perpetuates the spread too thin because now I've added three other things to my list. Like you got to find the planet, you got to find the this, the that,
Mm.
rather than right. And I
Right.
think that's like maybe that like exhale, that breath, maybe more than anything is what I'm hoping we can kind of impart and give people right that space. I mean, you especially with your like incredibly strong background in training and mindfulness about just talk about that pause, right?
I'm curious, like Elizabeth, when you coach people, and of course, keeping confidentiality, but what are some ways you see this show up? Because I'm getting a sense like that it shows up in different, it's not always the same root of why someone's feeling that way.
I think that's a great question. And I'll say a couple things, but then I definitely want to turn that back to you because given that you're asking the question, I suspect you also have some thoughts about how you see it showing up.
Mhm.
So, I mean, one sort of, I guess, telltale sign that isn't even that someone is speaking this in words is just people showing up chronically exhausted. And
Mm.
I, gosh, I mean, I have to think that at least 50% maybe of my clients continually report just being so tired. And as you said, overwhelmed. I mean, sometimes people will use the word burnout. Sometimes it's
Mm.
stress. So, like, if we think about being at kind of different points in the stress cycle, like we can kind of get activated if there's a lot going on, and then we kind of crash, and then we need another like major stressor to kick us back into that kind of like, chronic stress and collapse. Some people
Hmm.
even refer to it as like a trauma loop. So I
Yeah.
definitely see that with people where they like need something, maybe it's a deadline or something really pressing to get going, and otherwise they're just kind of in that like shutdown collapse mode. So that's
Mm.
that's a that's a kind of alarmingly common one, I will say, because that really suggests that people are really beyond their limit. Not just at the limit, they're beyond it, right? They're like in survival mode, but nothing more than that.
Right.
And then sometimes people do just explicitly will say like, I just, I'm getting stuff done. I'm meeting my deadlines, but I don't feel good about any of it.
Hmm.
I don't know how does that connect to what you've seen, or are there other
Yeah.
things?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'm hearing in what you're saying, and I relate to this myself actually, which is, needing a deadline to be able to kind of get into that performance mode. And I think one thing I realized over the course of the coaching is people who need to just really know what's the best way for you to work and how are they spending their energy and when. Because I think if we just ignore that, it's almost like we're trying to push a certain energy into different times of day or different times of the week when it's not the right moment for that.
Mm,
And so one thing I'm seeing is people discovering a lot that, oh, wait, it's not just time management, it's my energy management on one end, right?
yeah.
Another thing I see is sometimes when we scratch the surface, I find people are often saying yes to a lot of things. And I think that comes from the pressure of feeling like we have to perform in a certain way or have, especially my clients who are maybe trying to get tenure or who are in a new position and they're just trying to say yes to everything. And I think that, that gets down to like a lot of deeper layers. I don't know if you've seen the same thing or similar things.
Oh, for sure. There's that whole thing of like needing to prove yourself and not quite knowing what is critical and what's not, and such
Mm.
concern about perception. And that's another thing I was thinking about as you were talking. There's also a big piece that it's kind of like, in a way, the elephant in the room, I think, that we haven't
Mm.
addressed. And that is, what standards are we setting for ourselves?
Yeah.
And that second part of that statement that we opened up the conversation with around, I don't feel like I'm doing anything to the best of my ability.
Mm.
Well, many of us, I think especially academics, um, are holding ourselves to a standard that is frankly maybe barely attainable or really unattainable.
Hmm.
And they tend not to be very gentle or kind or compassionate or friendly to us, right? And and so some of it, I think there's room there for not only exploring, it's interesting because it's like there's almost like an input and an output side of this. I'm not sure if that really makes sense, but like the input side is, how are you spending your time? How are you spending your energy, as you said, right? What are you saying yes to? What are you saying no to? I think there are also questions around like our values. Are we living in alignment with those? Are we, prioritizing our time
Mm.
according to that? And then there's like the after the fact. Okay, we've done what we've done. We've made the choices we've made. Now, how are we looking back and assessing, right,
Yeah.
those choices? And how much are we beating ourselves up because we didn't do one of the things perfectly?
Yeah. And I'm hearing a voice in my head go, yeah, but we have to be competitive. And it's just a competitive
Yeah, yeah,
uh,
yeah, yeah,
context that we work in.
yeah,
And
yeah.
to me, it's really interesting of how do you keep that competitive edge and of course, keep up a certain amount of rigor, which is necessary, of course. But like you're saying, how do we then be kind to ourselves amidst all of that in a way that helps us actually move forward versus get stuck or get overwhelmed.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
that's a great question. What's your answer, Victoria? How do you help people who come with
Well,
that? Because right, that's a reasonable challenge to be like,
yeah.
that all sounds great. And if I fill in the blank, had tenure, had, whatever, a different job, I could do all that. But because of my circumstances, I can't do it. And I understand that's a very real feeling.
Yes. Yeah.
And yet I suspect that you work with people to maybe open up the possibility of slightly different perspectives, or what do you do if somebody comes with that?
Yeah, and I'm honestly like I really try to respect that sometimes there is a reality to that in certain really competitive atmospheres. But I think, the question for me would be get curious about how are you relating to what's going on or what your circumstances are. Like you're saying, the standards that you might be setting for yourself on one end, like not just like what are the standards you're having for yourself? Are they realistic or not? Right. And maybe you don't have it. Like there are rock and hard place kind of situations, right, where people don't have a choice. Then the question for me becomes, and how are you relating to that?
Can you say more about that? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
What does that mean? How are you relating to it?
Yeah. If you're if you have a deadline and you're staying up, until 3 in the morning, working on a paper or working on whatever is due, and you're noticing those deadlines creep up and you're starting to get like more and more stressed out, or people are asking, you to show up for X, Y, or Z meeting or whatever it is. What are you telling yourself in those moments? And then, are you taking it as something super stressful? Are you connecting to the parts of you that really can handle some of that? And are there parts of you that's not like saying no when it could? So I have a lot of questions there. It's like, how are you relating to it? Meaning it's really like, how are you seeing or perceiving what's going on around you? And then is there any place in that you could relate a little bit differently that might be helpful? It doesn't mean we're like getting rid of the problem and necessarily. Like one option is to get rid of the problem if we can. The other is if I can't get rid of the problem, how can I relate differently to it, I guess.
Right.
I don't know what shows up
Oh
for you
my God.
there.
Oh my gosh. I have so many thoughts about what you're saying. So first of all, like, yes, I love that. And 100%. And I think like the whole self-talk piece, again, I think we could probably speak for hours about that and the importance of, again, like as you were talking, I was just viewing it as like this, like opening up a little space, right? Like we can get so, I mean, I know for me, and my sense is that this is my clients have similar experience. Like we can get so constricted, like so kind of melded and merged with like whatever the experience is in the moment,
Mm,
particularly if it's a negative experience. It's like we literally can't see, right? And if you think about what stress does to us, I mean, yeah, you can't see, you have blinders on, right? So we can't get a different perspective. We're not even reflecting on what is happening within us or how we're viewing it and how that might actually be either helping or exacerbating the problem. Not to say that we've caused it by any stretch. Like, I think
right.
so many people, especially right now in academia, like, this is a tough environment and it's just getting tougher every day. Right. And so it isn't about pretending, that it's not what it is. And yet, as you said, like, there are really interesting questions that we can ask ourselves. And even to me, the process of just pausing to ask the questions shifts something because it
Yeah.
brings another part of us online, and it just creates a little bit of distance rather than that like super tight contraction or constricted feeling. The other thing from a practical standpoint, as you were talking about, just sort of getting creative about the questions that you're asking and how you might look at it. And can you just get rid of it, right? Like, is
Right.
the, I mean, I've heard it referred to as the 4Ds. I've heard it referred to as the 3Bs, but like, we'll see if I can come up with them off the top of my head. The 3Bs are better it, barter it, or bag it. So these are all
Um,
about like kind of managing our portfolio of activities. So,
mhm.
so better it is maybe the one that's most intriguing, right? It's like, can you make the thing that you have to do feel different? Maybe
Yeah.
that's just shifting your attitude about it. Maybe it's lowering your standards. Maybe it's incorporating some like playfulness to it. Maybe it's just putting music on when you do something,
Yeah.
engaging a friend, like even making it a little smaller, right? Like there are so many ways to potentially better things. And then barter it is just kind of another word for delegate. Like, can you get somebody else to do it? Is this something that you really have to be the one? Are you
Mm,
uniquely positioned to do this thing?
mm,
And we know delegating is super hard, and there maybe we'll talk about that on
yeah.
another conversation. There's a whole set of things there, but and then bag it. Like, do you really need to do it at all? Can this just,
Yeah.
or do you need to do it now? And that's, I mean, I won't take too much time on this, but to go to the 4Ds, what it adds really. So it's delete, that's get rid of it.
I love it.
Delegate, as we already said. Defer. So
Mm,
that's, does it have to happen now? Like, can you give yourself a little breathing room? And then I already lost the last one, but I think it's like diminish or something, make it smaller.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I
Um,
love that. I love that. It's really helpful because it's like all of a sudden options that I wasn't thinking of before become possible. Like, oh, I can delegate this. Oh, I can actually just not take this on, just let go of this or
right.
yeah.
And also, maybe that's a moment when we just need to take 5 minutes and feel whatever we're feeling,
Mm,
and just have compassion for how hard it is, what
yeah.
we're doing, and so I think that's really critical as well.
I appreciate what you're saying. And I think it's very wise because you're saying, when I pause and just notice what I'm feeling, I mean, we know from mindfulness practice and compassion practice that that does change things. It just shifts something a little bit, right? It's just a tiny little shift. It doesn't make the work go away. I remember writing a piece and I remember getting so overwhelmed and I was just building this big ball and it was a lot of work and I had to turn it in. There were consequences if I didn't. But when I stopped and I thought, I'm looking at this like such a horrible thing to do. And I'm like, all I have to do is push buttons on my keyboard and type
Hmm.
words. Like I made it like a little bit more simple. I know it's not just pushing buttons and typing words, but like it was really made me gauge like am I overreacting to this a little bit? It's like there was something deeper going on for me, right? There was a part of me thinking I can't handle this and I can't do this. And I think, what you're getting to is interesting because when we create that space, like you're saying, to say, how am I feeling about this? I actually have an opportunity to see in to say, what am I really thinking? What am I believing here? That's
Yeah.
maybe getting in the way of like just having this be a little bit less of a burden or overwhelm.
Right. Right. I think that's a great observation. Are there other things that immediately come to mind, when you think about clients presenting with this kind of a challenge, things that you maybe haven't mentioned yet, whether it's just an approach or tools or, anything that you tend to bring to help
Yeah.
people with this?
I think, one thing I kind of mentioned earlier, but I think is important that sometimes, if we take away the issue where it's like, I have to turn this in, and if I don't, there's a consequence, that kind of a thing, or I have to show up for my class. A lot of times I work with leaders in academia, and maybe it's people who were in a professor position and they moved to chair or from chair to dean or whatever it is. And so I think another issue there is that our ability to set boundaries and say no. And I think it's really hard to set boundaries for everybody on the planet. But I think sometimes, could we look at the overwhelm that we're feeling and is there anything around setting boundaries that is getting in the way of me feeling like I have a handle on things? And if I'm putting out fires every day, what's going on that's causing that? I don't know if you kind of, so like another angle to why we might feel overwhelmed, I've seen a lot is just not being able to set boundaries.
For sure. And I'm not great at it either, full
I'm
disclosure,
terrible at
but
it
it's something that I continue to work on. But yeah, no, I think that's right. And the other thing that I thought about, again, just sort of on the more practical side, as you were talking, is this idea that oftentimes people are so scheduled. Do you know what I mean? Not only is there no sort of emotional or energetic buffer, but there's no buffer in their calendar. So they might say, like, I'm planning, I'm doing all this, I'm time blocking, I'm doing everything people said to do. And yet they're not factoring in, well, there's always going to be something
Mm,
unexpected. It's like we've got
yes.
to actually plan time for the unexpected. You might not know
That
exactly
talk.
what it's going to be, but there's going to be something. And hey, if there's not, fantastic. Now you've got an extra 2 hours. You can like take a walk or whatever.
Yeah.
And that I think is another point that it's exactly what you're saying, Victoria, about getting to something deeper. The people that we work with are definitely smart people,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
And and yet they're talking with us because they want more. There's something more that they want from their career, from their life, and they haven't been able to quite get there yet. And and I think that's because so often, at least it's been my experience, there's just like you said, whether it's limiting beliefs, whether it's fears that sometimes are really tamped down, we're not even aware of, that
Mm,
maybe it's what are people going to think if I don't, or what if my teaching evaluations are bad? And but it's really this overblown. It kind of connects back to that. Maybe our standards are too high for ourselves, right? Or perfectionism, which is protecting us, right? It's protecting us
yeah.
from vulnerability and from fear. And it also though keeps our lives small. And and so a lot of what I really enjoy doing with people is getting to that sort of deeper, like, what are the different parts of you that are coming up in this situation? And there's one part that like
Mm,
really wants that big, huge, happy life. And there's another part that's like trying to keep you, really in line for this reason because of this fear. And there might be another part that's trying to keep you in line in another way or whatever. And
mm,
really, really trying to understand that. To me, that's like one of the things I love, right? Because it feels like we're really able to get to the root. And I want to acknowledge we just can't always get there, right? Like if we are in survival mode, then we
yeah.
do the best to take care of ourselves, to help our clients take care of themselves, to get maybe a one item to-do list. I'm a big fan of the one item to-do list under all circumstances. And
Mm,
uh, and yeah, so I mean, that's one of the things I love about coaching and that I hope will come across in these conversations is there's no one size fits all. We want
yeah.
to meet people and we want to meet ourselves where we are. And we want to do that with kindness and knowing that we're not alone. Like that's another reason, right? That we're having these
Yeah.
conversations so that people can see, yes, Victoria and I are seeing tons of people who are presenting with these same challenges. So we so often feel isolated when in fact it's the opposite, if we would speak.
Yeah. It's so normal.
Yes. So
Yeah.
can I sort of put you on the spot and ask, like, sort
Okay.
of a mini speed coaching kind of situation? If
Mm,
you had 2 minutes with someone who presented
mm,
with this, I'm spread so thin, I'm not doing anything to the best of my ability. That's their sort of presenting agenda. And you just had 2 minutes with them. What
mm.
would you bring?
Yeah. I think I'd bring a lot of curiosity first to say, what is it that excellent looks like to you?
Mm.
What does excellent look like?
And how would
And
you know if you were achieving that, right?
exactly, that's my next question. You
Yeah,
know.
sorry. I'm stealing your 2 minutes. You can have another.
No, no, that's okay. And then I might get curious about, what are the things in your life that are aligning to, I think, there's more than 2 minutes here, but it would be, let's look at what your life purpose is. Out of all these things that you're doing, what's aligning to that and what is not serving that on the grand scheme of things. And then on the more minute things to get into like what's really going on that, is causing this. Like what are the things that you're doing or not doing that are getting in the way of feeling less overwhelmed? So I think that's definitely a conversation for more than 2 minutes, but that's how I would probably start off.
Yeah. Yeah.
How about you? I'm curious if I can throw that ball right back to
Uh,
you. Cor.
yeah, no, absolutely. But, after I ask the question, I'm like, yikes, because I feel myself pulled in lots of directions because
Yeah.
as you're highlighting, there are so many ways that you can take that, right? There are lots of, we can go to the practical side, we can go to the deeper side. And I do like to go to the deeper side. And I recognize sometimes
Mm,
we have to go to the practical, right? But I
mm,
think my very first inclination is to just lead with compassion. You know,
Mm.
you talked about curiosity, which is so critical, and another C, compassion, and to hopefully, you know, try to cultivate that in the client as well, compassion for
Yeah.
themselves, um, and and it's almost like what I find myself wanting to do is just like, you know, like that's what I want to lead with, that's what I want to bring, is just like the sigh,
Yeah.
and see if they can just take that sigh. But for 2 minutes, I think I would ask, you know, like what would be most helpful, you know, like
Mm.
given where you are right now, what would be most helpful, and then let that guide, you know, sort of where we go from there. And I love the question about what does excellent look like, right? Or what does it mean to not be doing to the best of your ability, or how does that feel, right? How's that showing up?
Mm.
And I also often, like, I know, again, more than 2 minutes, far more than 2 minutes if we were actually doing it, but I
Right.
always really like to ask people, what would the ideal look like? And you have to be in the right headspace. If you're really in survival mode, it's probably hard to go there, but what do you want it to look like? Like if you were doing your best, how would that
Mm-hmm.
feel? How would that look? How would things be different? You
Mm.
because then people often realize, oh, there are actually a fair number of things that are pretty aligned with what that would be, right? And that helps us kind of zero in on the places where we can play and get creative and kind of expand.
Yeah. And if I may, you said something earlier that I think was so important, which is, you know, what are you valuing here?
Mhm.
You know, getting down to like in doing these activities that you're doing, what is it that you're valuing? Because sometimes, like you said, we find conflicting values,
Yeah.
right? And so maybe if we dig into that a little bit, we could say, hey, I'm actually valuing this thing and I don't really want to be valuing that. I want to be valuing this other thing, which means X, Y, or Z, right, to do. And
Yeah.
I think that can
And
really be a great roadmap.
yes. And to me, then that's where like parts work and this kind of it becomes so powerful and so interesting
Yeah,
to
I am
explore.
so curious about that. So I was going to ask you earlier, but we kind of shifted gears. But
Yeah,
if you
yeah,
could
yeah.
speak to that a little bit,
Okay.
because I know you're
Yeah,
an
yeah,
expert.
yeah. I'll just say a little bit and maybe we can come back to it in, I'm sure we can come back to it in future conversations. So it's based in the internal family systems model. There are lots of different forms of parts work, but the one that I am most familiar with is based in internal family systems. And it's this, there's this sort of fundamental idea that we have these parts and there's nothing wrong, abnormal, weird, strange to get rid of. These all parts, as Dick Schwartz, who's the founder of IFS, says, no bad parts. And we just get curious and we understand their roles and we understand, you know, how can they evolve within those roles. They're kind of stuck in a lot of cases, like that taskmaster who's just like driving us when we have this other part of us that's like, maybe I don't need to be working 15 hours a day, or, you
Mm,
know, like that little voice. So it's, can we hear from all of them? Can we welcome all of them? And then from that core of self, that grounded, I think we all, hopefully all of us have experienced that, like from time to time, right? Where you're just like, wow, I feel solid. I feel grounded. You almost have that
mm.
like spacious sense in your body, even.
It really helps you decenter from, you know, kind of disconnect yourself from that part of you that's feeling maybe scared or
Yes.
overwhelmed, where it's
Yes.
not taking over so much, where you can see it.
This is just kind of making that explicit so that we can work with it, as opposed to being driven by all these limiting beliefs or assumptions that we don't interrogate, we don't get curious about. You know, it's kind of where you were starting with the 2 minutes, right? With
Mhm.
curiosity. And that alone, I think, opens up space. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
I love that. I love that because it's kind of very similar to, I mean, I'm biased because it's similar to what we do in mindfulness, just gives you kind of a name
Mhm.
to things a little bit more and gives you that space to see things. And I suppose, I mean, I'm hearing you say compassion a lot. So I suppose you do that with some compassion and not judging yourself for what those parts are asking of you or wanting or doing or not doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's, you know, the guidance is to sort of treat the parts as people. And as you would, you know, when you're being kind to someone, maybe even a child, right? Treat them
Mm.
as you would treat a child who's hurting, right?
Yeah.
And I actually find that set parts aside. I find that to be a really powerful reframe as well. If we're really feeling down on ourselves and we're being hypercritical and nothing's good enough and I'm not doing things to the best of my ability, how would you speak to a child? You know, picture
Mhm.
the child version of yourself even. Like that can be very even emotional for me to think about like somebody saying those things to like my 4-year-old self. It feels quite awful.
Yeah.
And and so that can really, I think, just increase our awareness of how harshly we are speaking to ourselves
Yes.
and
Yes.
what that means and just brings a little softness to it.
Yeah.
So
And that's what I meant by relate differently. You're describing it
it's
perfectly.
beautiful.
Yeah, because our tendency is to be so harsh. And so now we're having the struggle and the overwhelm from the actual event or whatever's going on. And we're adding on that layer of extra suffering because we're
Yeah.
mad at ourselves. We're ashamed of ourselves for feeling that way. We're, berating ourselves, all of those things. And that's adding to the overwhelm and the suffering or the freezing or whatever it is.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I once heard someone say in comparing pain, you know, people will sometimes say pain is inevitable, suffering is not. And I know there are people use the word suffering differently, but I remember hearing, and I wish I could remember who said it, but that pain is like you've got broken glass in your hand, and suffering is clenching your fist down on
Mm,
broken glass.
yeah.
You know, it's adding, like you said, we're putting that layer on top of it by thinking this is never going to change or this is my fault or if only, right? Like all of the sort of self-blaming kinds of
Yep.
stories that or just self-limiting. Yeah, let me ask you a question because we're getting to a point where we want to wrap up relatively soon. And so I wonder, are there any parting thoughts or tools
Mm,
or exercises, like if you were going to leave listeners, like maybe if they only listened to the first 5 minutes and the final 5 minutes, what parting words or thoughts or suggestions do you have?
mm. All of those thoughts about yourself are part of being a human being. So even the criticisms and even those things that we're telling ourselves, that habit is a human habit. So you're not alone, number one. You're not the only one. And then, if I get into the practical, here's a couple practical questions I might throw out there. Number one is going back to what would you like your life to look like right now?
Beautiful.
Right. And then map that out for yourself and then make a list of the things that you are doing and not doing right now. And are they serving that or are they taking away from that? And out of those things, what's things you can let go of, like you're saying? And what's some things that you could maybe relate differently to? Like if I think of washing the dishes and something I want to do, but maybe I could think, well, I can look at it as part of my health and my well-being, or I could look at it differently. So like, what are the things you can look at differently? And then what is it that you are doing or not doing that may be getting in the way of achieving what you're trying to achieve? And that's a hard question because we're, again, do that with kindness and compassion because we might then get, oh, look what I'm doing to myself. Not as an excuse to start treating yourself, badly, but to say, hey, I'm noticing these behaviors that I'm having that aren't serving me. What can I do about those? Could I try something new? Can I try something different? And so kind of what is it that I want? And what are the behaviors that aren't serving that? And what are the behaviors that are? And how can I have more of those?
Yeah,
How about you? Go.
beautiful. Yeah. Oh, no. Okay.
No.
So I guess two things are coming to mind as you're talking, and maybe came to mind earlier as well. One is celebrating small wins, right? We haven't really touched on that directly. Like,
I love
in
that.
addition to giving yourself compassion when things are not going the way you want or you're feeling bad, like let's be real about all the stuff that you are getting done, whether it's to the A plus level or the A
Mm,
minus level or even the B minus level, because almost nobody's doing anything worse than that. They just
yeah.
think that they're failing, right? Um,
Yeah.
let's create space to celebrate. And then there's again, on the perspective angle, this is a question that my coach asked me many years ago, and that I have used on a number of occasions since for myself as well as for clients. And it
Mm,
always helps me to just get that more groundedness, that more spacious perspective. And that is, what would 90-year-old Elizabeth, I'm using my own, right? What would 90-year-old Elizabeth tell you? What would she say to
love
you?
it. Yeah.
Again, I just like, to me, that feels like a deep breath, like an exhale,
Mm,
right? It's just that you talked about values, right? And priorities and boundaries and what we say yes to. And
mm,
it's sort of like right sizes everything, right? By going that far into the future and looking back on what really matters in our lives, it's just like it's just such a quick reset. So I
mm.
think those are my final parting words.
I love that. I love that. Yeah. Really takes your perspective out. Yeah.
I think so. This has been, I mean, of course, we've known each other a long time. We've had lots of wonderful conversations. We've done lots of work together, running groups and all kinds of things. So
Yeah.
I knew it would be great fun to have this conversation. It did not disappoint. Whether anybody listens to it or not, I'm glad we spent the time together, and I've learned from hearing your perspective. And yeah, just thanks so much for
Yeah.
being here, Victoria, and any listeners as well. Thanks for
Yeah.
joining
Thank
us.
you too, Elizabeth. I reflect the same. It's just a joy to chat with you, and I've been coached by you, and I know how powerful your coaching is, and I'm just really grateful. And yeah, thank you for anybody who's listening. And if there's something that you want us to talk about, we're glad to consider that and maybe bring it into one of these conversations, because maybe something you're struggling with or you see around you. And so maybe we've seen it around as well, or we have some good coaching questions for that. So
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Well, thanks so much. Thanks everyone, and have a great day. And I will end with my sort of signature thing that we can cut out if Victoria doesn't want my signature thing on here, which is thanks for being here and thanks for being you.
I love it.
Bye.
Thanks. Thanks, Elizabeth. Bye, everybody.